The anemometer bolted to the porch railing didn't just spin, it shrieked. The mechanical whine registered a sustained wind velocity of exactly 42 knots, with erratic gusts peaking at 58. Inside the Highland Cache monitoring station, my eyes remained locked on the primary console, tracking the telemetry across the green digital readout. The barometric pressure had been dropping in a steep, jagged curve for 3 hours. A massive low-pressure system had stalled directly over our elevation. My topographical map wasn't decoration. I'd personally overseen the reinforced framing of this cabin, utilizing Douglas fir timbers and interlocking joints to ensure it could outlast extreme kinetic loads. Tonight, the eastern ridge was loading with a dangerous amount of wet snow. Ice pelted the triple-paned glass, a rhythmic battering that threatened to drown out the steady rumble of the secondary diesel generator. I was checking the delicate calibration on the primary seismograph locker, ensuring the internal pendulums were isolated from the building's micro-vibrations when the perimeter motion sensors tripped. The security system engaged instantly. It threw harsh LED floodlights toward the dense tree line, slicing through the blinding whiteout. Pivoting to the external camera feed on monitor 3, the visual hit me. A silver SUV was high-centered on a frozen snowbank at the absolute end of the decommissioned logging road. Its headlights cut uselessly into the storm, illuminating nothing but the horizontal drive of falling snow. That access road had been formally closed in October due to severe structural washouts. Whoever was behind the wheel had willfully bypassed 3 municipal hazard barricades to reach this elevation. Hesitation in these conditions was a mathematical error. I grabbed my static line from the gear wall, clipped a load-bearing steel carabiner to the forged loop of my climbing harness, and shoved the heavy steel door open against the crushing pressure of the gale. The ambient temperature was 12 degrees Fahrenheit, but the severe wind chill drove it down to -15. The crosswind hit my chest like a physical blow. Keeping my center of gravity low, my alpine boots found the icy gravel beneath the shifting accumulation. By the time I reached the trapped vehicle, the driver's side door was jammed solidly against a frozen embankment of packed ice and mud. The front axle was completely buried, the high-end tires having spun themselves into frictionless depressions. I hammered my gloved fist against the passenger side window, wiping away a thick layer of rime ice. Through the tinted glass, a woman sat gripping the leather steering wheel. Her knuckles were white, her posture rigid, but she wasn't panicking. She was systematically scanning the digital dashboard, calculating her remaining fuel and dropping battery life. Applying upward leverage to clear the ice accumulating on the lower sill, I wrenched the passenger door open. The interior heater was blasting, but the warm air was instantly overwhelmed by the violent vacuum of freezing mountain wind rushing into the cabin. "Grab your essential gear." "Now," I instructed, my voice cutting sharply through the howl of the storm, leaving no room for corporate pleasantries. She didn't freeze, and she didn't waste a breath arguing. Reaching into the back seat with quick, deliberate movements, she grabbed a waterproof Pelican hard case and pulled a heavy canvas duffel bag from the floorboard. Reaching in, I gripped her forearm securely over the thick fabric of her designer wool coat, providing a physical anchor, and pulled her out into the storm. We hit the deep snowbank together. The wind immediately tried to knock her off balance. Stepping ahead, I broke the deep drift with my boots, deliberately angling my broader body to shield her from the worst of the brutal crosswind. We moved methodically toward the yellow glow of the cabin porch, step by synchronized step. Once safely inside the mudroom, I shoved the heavy steel door shut, threw the industrial deadbolt with a solid clack, and engaged the secondary weather seal to lock out the draft. The sudden silence in the room felt absolute and pressurized, punctuated only by the crackle of the wood stove and the rhythmic hum of the server racks. The cabin was purely utilitarian, designed for precise geological data collection. The main space featured exposed timber framing, a central cast iron stove radiating dry heat, and wide drafting tables covered in core samples, calibration tools, and large-scale Mylar topographic maps. Dropping the hard case onto the floorboards with a dull thud, she stood shivering uncontrollably. Her tailored wool coat was soaked completely through with melting snow. Her dark hair was plastered to her forehead. She looked rapidly around the room, assessing the reinforced exits, the equipment racks, and finally, settling directly on me. "Elaine Brooks," she said. Her voice was remarkably steady despite the fine, involuntary tremor in her jaw. "Executive Board, I'm here for the mandatory compliance inspection of the recovered asset at Highland Cache." Unclipping my harness, I hung it meticulously on the heavy-duty wall rack. She wasn't here for an impromptu executive stunt. She was here because Marcus Vanguard, the vice president of operations, had forced a last-minute, on-site compliance inspection. It was a calculated move designed to keep her trapped away from headquarters just long enough to miss a critical merger vote he needed her to be absent for. Felix Myers. Site geologist and lead surveyor, I replied, crossing my arms over my chest. And you're exactly 48 hours late for a safe transit window? Miss Brooks, the road you took was formally flagged as structurally impassable on the internal company network at 0800 on Tuesday. Marcus Vanguard provided the route packet this morning at 0600, she countered, pulling off her ruined leather gloves and tossing them onto a wooden bench. He explicitly assured me the logging road was the primary, cleared access point for this specific inspection, the precise moment she named Vanguard. The underlying architecture of the situation locked into place. Marcus Vanguard had top-tier administrative access to the exact same geological stability reports and real-time weather telemetry that I did. He knew that specific road was a verified environmental trap. If I ignored the reality of the data sitting on my servers, I'd be passively helping him bury both a massive safety violation and her deciding vote. Pivoting back to the primary workstation, my fingers moved across the mechanical keyboard. I pulled up Vanguard's administrative acknowledgement logs on the secondary terminal. I rapidly cross-referenced the corporate server access times with the municipal weather service updates. The data was undeniable. Same severe storm alerts, same road closure notice, same time-stamped administrative access from his executive IP address. My thumb stopped on the scrolling screen. He hadn't missed the warning. He had actively signed off on it, deliberately overriding the automated safety flag to generate her flawed route packet. The primary access road was formally closed, I stated, turning the monitor slightly so she could see the glowing green text. Her corporate accounts were systematically frozen. Out there, the blizzard is rapidly burying every safe exit Vanguard had already erased on paper. She stared at the screen, her eyes narrowing as she processed the digital evidence. The realization didn't break her composure. It sharpened her immediate focus. If you'd rather I call emergency services and keep my professional distance, say it now, I told her, establishing a clear, practical boundary. I'll follow your call and initiate the standard distress protocol right now. But be aware, they aren't making it up that 15% grade tonight. Not with this rapid accumulation. You will be sitting in this cabin until Monday. Shaking her head, a sharp movement sent a few drops of water flying from her hair. No. Emergency services can't fix a boardroom coup. Just point me to the heater so I can thaw my hands and think of a viable workaround. Walking over to the primary supply locker, I pulled out my insulated fleece work shirt. It was built specifically for sub-zero fieldwork, layered with synthetic down, and highly practical. I held the garment out to her. Your outer coat is compromised and actively drawing heat away from your core. Take off the wet layers immediately. Use this for thermal insulation. Taking the heavy fleece, her fingers brushed the rugged material. Thank you. I appreciate the logic. The washroom is through that reinforced door, I said, pointing to the back of the cabin. There's a secondary electric thermal unit in there to keep the internal pipes from freezing. Leave your wet boots by the stove here so the leather can dry. Turning my back, I walked over to the monitoring console, giving her absolute privacy. The satellite uplink status bar was flashing a steady, warning yellow. Interference from the dense storm clouds was severely degrading the data packet transmission rate. Vanguard wanted her completely isolated and entirely out of the way. By Friday at 23:42, the situation escalated. The main diesel generator failed. The comforting hum that usually filled the cabin died instantly, plunging the room into darkness save for the flickering glow of the wood stove and the green LEDs of the battery backup console. I had been cataloging quartz samples by specific weight. Standing up, I grabbed my aluminum flashlight from my belt and systematically checked the circuit breakers. Dead. The external air intake had likely frozen completely over with rime ice, suffocating the engine. At exactly 2 a.m., there was a sharp, clear knock on the interior door. Elaine stepped into the main room wearing the driest, insulated layers she had left in her duffel, with my heavy field fleece thrown over them for necessary extra warmth. The oversized fleece looked purely practical, not graceful, but it performed its function perfectly. It kept the vital core heat trapped against her body. She had rolled the long sleeves up meticulously past her wrists so she could use her hands. The thermal unit in the back room shut off completely, she said, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. The primary generator tripped due to intake freeze, I explained, aiming the flashlight beam directly at the floorboards so the stark light wouldn't hit her eyes. The wood stove in here is the only active heat source remaining on the grid. The ambient temperature in the back room will drop below freezing in approximately 40 minutes. Walking over to the cast iron stove, I threw open the metal latch with a clack. Using long iron tongs, I added 3 large logs of dense, keyline dried hardwood to the embers, carefully adjusting the lower intake damper to maximize oxygen flow. The fire roared to life almost immediately, and a wave of intense, dry heat pushed out into the room. The ambient temperature near the stove climbed rapidly, creating a localized zone of 80-degree air necessary to push back the encroaching frost. Elaine moved closer to the stove, holding her bare hands out toward the radiating cast iron. The oversized fleece collar had folded in awkwardly on one side, letting a draft of residual cold air hit her neck. Moving to the side of the stove, I adjusted the upper metal damper so the draft wouldn't pull the heat away from where she stood, ensuring the thermal pocket remained stable, and returned to the drafting table immediately, giving her space to thaw without crowding her. "Thank you," she said quietly, looking at the flames rather than at me. "We need to thoroughly review your logistics and your remaining timeline," I said, clicking on an articulated drafting lamp, illuminating the topographical map I had been working on. "Marcus knew the storm was hitting," Elaine said, walking over to the table. The intense heat from the stove was finally returning a natural color to her face. "He scheduled an emergency proxy merger vote for Tuesday at exactly 8 in the morning. If I'm stranded up here without communication, I miss the mandatory quorum. He triggers a default absentee clause, and the merger goes through without my department's financial oversight." Shoving the heavy wooden chair out of the way with my boot, I flattened the curled edges of the Mylar map and picked up a red grease pencil. My hand started moving, drawing a precise line. "We are here," I said, tapping the red tip on the contour line representing Highland Cache. "The logging road you took is a total dead end, but there's a secondary, highly secure communications bunker 1.2 miles east, directly across the ridge. It has a hardline fiber connection that completely bypasses the vulnerable satellite grid. If we reach it by tomorrow afternoon, you can access the corporate network." She leaned over the Mylar sheet, her finger tracing the tightly packed elevation rings with surprising accuracy. "The contour lines merge here," she noted, tapping the ridge. "That's a vertical drop, isn't it? What is this specific sector?" "A wind slab," I answered, adjusting my assessment. Most executives couldn't read a topographical map, but she was analyzing the data correctly. It's a heavily compressed layer of snow resting on a steep incline. It carries a high avalanche risk if you don't know exactly where to step. But I surveyed this sector thoroughly in the summer. I know the bedrock layout underneath the snowpack. If we cross the slab following the underlying granite ridges, we get to the bunker safely. Saturday morning broke with a gray, flat light and a howling gale that rattled the window frames in their casings. At 7:14, the satellite alert module on the main console buzzed a single time before dying completely. We were officially cut off from the grid. Elaine was already awake, packing her hard case with mechanical, focused efficiency. Turning the dead, black screen of the monitor toward her, I laid out the reality. Frozen accounts, blocked admin access, route officially closed, storm active. Every single path off that mountain has Vanguard's fingerprints on it. "I need to leave now," she said, zipping her coat, a sharp edge of desperation cutting into her composed voice. "If we hike down the tree line toward the lower elevation, I might be able to find a stable cellular signal to authorize a block on the vote." "No." Stepping firmly in front of the door, I planted my boots on the floorboards. I didn't raise my voice, but I didn't leave room for negotiation either. You don't have the body mass or the specialized gear to anchor against sustained 40-knot gusts on an exposed 30-degree slope. The wind shear will physically pick you up and drop you into the ravine. Physics doesn't care about your board meeting, Miss Brooks. Glaring at me, her corporate authority clashed violently with the cold, hard reality of the mountain environment. I refuse to sit here and let him steal my department. I have audited and built that division from the ground up. If you'd rather I call emergency services and wait, say it now, I reminded her, holding her gaze steadily. But if you want to win this fight, you have to survive the mountain first. We do it my way. We prepare, we calculate the exact risk, and we execute the plan. Taking a slow, jagged breath, the initial spike of anger slowly bled out into cold pragmatism. She recognized the logic. She nodded once, accepting the terms. "We aren't sitting," I continued, tossing her a lightweight climbing helmet and a pair of heavy steel-spiked crampons. We're taking the eastern ridge to the bunker. Put these on over your boots. We move in exactly 10 minutes. I knelt onto the wooden floorboards, gripping the nylon strap of her right crampon to ensure the fit was exact. Keep your ankle completely locked, I instructed, pulling the webbing tight until the forged steel points bit securely into the heavy rubber sole of her boot. If the strap has even a millimeter of slack, the ice will find it and roll your ankle. She looked down, completely focused, and locked her joint perfectly still, trusting my expertise while I secured the heavy iron buckle. The trek across the wind slab took 2 grueling hours. The wind was a physical wall of moving air and sharp ice crystals, shoving against us with every step. Leading the way, I kicked solid, deep steps into the thick ice crust. A heavy static rope connected the steel ring of my harness directly to hers, keeping us tethered at a precise 15-foot interval. The exposure to our right was absolute. One slip meant a 400-foot, uncontrollable slide into the rocky valley below. Halfway across the widest section of the slab, the wind spiked without warning. Elaine stumbled, her right boot losing traction on a patch of clear, frictionless blue ice, hidden beneath a dusting of fresh snow. The rope went taut with a violent, snapping jerk. I didn't think. I reacted with years of ingrained muscle memory. Dropping my center of gravity immediately, I drove the steel pick of my ice axe deep through the crust and into the solid ice beneath. I locked my knees and braced my entire body weight against the steep angle of the mountain. The kinetic jolt hit my harness hard, pulling violently at my waist, but my anchor held perfectly rigid against the ice. Looking back over my shoulder, she was down on one knee, breathing hard, her weight pulling slightly over the incline. But she hadn't panicked. She hadn't screamed. She looked up at the taut rope connecting us, then looked directly at me. Finding her footing, she dug the front points of her crampons aggressively into the ice, nodded once to signal she was secure, and kept moving forward. Step by careful step. When we finally breached the heavy, reinforced steel doors of the secondary bunker, the silence inside was sudden and deafening. The air was stale, smelling intensely of ozone and freezing dust. Moving to the main panel, I fired up the auxiliary power grid, checking the breaker sequences one by one. The server racks hummed to life, a steady heartbeat in the cold concrete room. Elaine didn't waste a single second resting. Opening her waterproof hard case, she pulled out a high-end corporate laptop and hardwired a yellow Ethernet cable directly into the primary terminal port on the wall. Her fingers moved rapidly over the keys, her eyes locked on the screen. The bunker terminal was legally segregated from Marcus's standard operational controls because it existed exclusively for disaster chain auditing and strict legal compliance. Her standard board-level token couldn't restore her day-to-day email account, but it could still unlock the preserved, read-only compliance logs stored locally. I'm bypassing the external account freeze via the emergency mainframe administrative protocol, she announced, her voice echoing slightly in the concrete room. I'm pulling down all of Vanguard's encoded root authorizations, his internal email logs, and the specific financial tracking data for the proposed merger. Standing near the door, I kept watch on the external weather monitors and watched her work. She was methodical, ruthlessly efficient, completely in her element. She understood the digital architecture the way I understood the bedrock. She wasn't just surviving this trap. She was actively hunting the man who set it, gathering the necessary, irrefutable ammunition to destroy his leverage. That evening, back in the relative safety of the main cabin, the storm finally began to break. The wind dropped to a low, manageable hum, and the barometric pressure stabilized on my monitors. I had boiled, filtered snowmelt on the top of the wood stove and prepared 2 portions of standard survival ration beef hash. It wasn't gourmet, but it was dense in necessary calories and sodium. Steam lifted from the rehydrated hash in thin white curls. For the first time since dawn, neither of us was bracing against wind shear ice, or a ticking corporate countdown. The only sound was the crackle of the hardwood in the stove. I scraped the better portion into the metal camping bowl and slid it precisely across the center of the table to her side. Picking up the mug, she wrapped her cold hands around the warm ceramic. "You align your coffee coaster perfectly with the grid lines on your topographic map," she noted. A small, genuine smile breaking the exhausted tension on her face. "Your obsession with precision and mapping extends to your basic furniture placement. It's a matter of calibration," I replied simply, taking a sip from my own mug. Reaching out, I adjusted a cylindrical core sample on the table so it sat perfectly parallel to the map's outer border. Disorder leads to variables. Variables lead to mistakes. She laughed softly, a dry, highly intelligent sound. I'll try not to misalign the salt shaker. I would appreciate that, I said, the ghost of a smile touching my own face. Looking down at the table, her smile faded into something much more reflective. I thought I was entirely prepared for this job. I mapped every financial risk, every market variable, every compliance loophole. I spent 8 months auditing the division to ensure absolute transparency. I didn't map a physical trap. I trusted the system to function logically. You trusted the system, I said, leaning back in my heavy wooden chair. Vanguard manipulated the system to create an illogical, forced outcome. But the system leaves logs. Tomorrow at 14, the municipal highway plows will clear Route 89. I've already coordinated with our logistics team via the bunker terminal. Julian will be waiting with a 4x4 truck at the lower checkpoint. She looked at me, the firelight catching the sharp intelligence in her eyes. Why are you helping me fight the VP of Operations? Vanguard has the authority to terminate your vendor agreement with a single signature on Monday morning. Because he authorized a transit route that knowingly compromised baseline safety protocols, I stated, laying out the facts exactly as they were, without embellishment. And because I don't like watching highly competent people get bullied and cornered by bureaucrats who hide behind automated emails and proxy votes. Sunday at 14, the sun broke through the remaining cloud cover, turning the mountain into a brilliant expanse of pristine white. Hiking down the newly cleared logging path to the lower checkpoint, the crisp crunch of our heavy boots was loud in the still air. Julian, the site logistics coordinator, was leaning against the grill of a running, heavy-duty F-350. Julian was a man who trusted tire pressure gauges more than people. He tapped a battered aluminum clipboard against his thigh, a nervous tick that always meant the precise schedule had fractured. "Felix," Julian said, tossing me the keys and handing me a stainless steel thermos of freshly brewed coffee. Good timing on the descent. Vanguard pushed an emergency notice through the automated executive system an hour ago. The scheduled merger proxy vote and your site termination hearing were just moved up. Tuesday, 8 a.m., sharp. Corporate headquarters. Elaine's face hardened, the muscles in her jaw setting like stone. He knows I have a 3-hour drive down the mountain and a commercial flight to catch. He's deliberately compressing the timeline, hoping the travel logistics will delay me just enough to miss the quorum. Then we don't waste time, I said, stepping past Julian and opening the passenger door of the truck for her. We calculate the distance, we map the variables, and we drive. Tuesday, 7:50 a.m. The 40th floor of the corporate headquarters was a sweeping monument to architectural glass, brushed steel, and silent power. The climate control was aggressive, pumping out a sterile manufactured chill that felt entirely different and somehow much more hostile than the natural mountain cold we had just survived. Standing in the hushed hallway outside the main executive boardroom, I wore a dark, perfectly tailored charcoal wool suit I kept in my city locker for rare compliance meetings. I held a thick, meticulously bound compliance packet securely in my left hand. Every single page was sequentially indexed. Every digital timestamp was verified against the server logs. Elaine stood next to me, her posture perfect, her tailored navy suit immaculate. Julian was stationed discreetly by the elevator banks, watching the floor traffic, acting as a quiet sentry. If we walk through those heavy doors, Vanguard will immediately attempt to frame this entire situation as an unauthorized site breach on my part, she said quietly. He will try to dismiss everything we pulled from the bunker as corrupted data. He can attempt whatever narrative he wants. I replied, checking the flush alignment of the documents in the folder one last time. The raw data is immutable. It doesn't care about his narrative or his title. Taking a slow, controlled breath to center herself, she pulled out her phone, her thumbs moving rapidly as she drafted a secure email. I am officially CCing the entire board of directors right now. I've listed you as my contracted lead risk advisor for the Highland Cache inspection. You aren't just a site geologist today, Felix. You're my designated, recognized expert. If you walk in there, with me, your professional name is permanently attached to this fight. It was a clear, calculated choice. She was tying her hard-earned corporate credibility directly to mine in front of the highest authority in the company. She was giving me the explicit option to step away, to protect my own lucrative site contract. Understood, I said, not moving a single inch from my position beside her. At exactly 8 a.m., Elaine stepped forward and pushed the heavy oak doors open. The expansive boardroom was full. Marcus Vanguard stood confidently at the head of the polished mahogany table, mid-sentence, gesturing smoothly toward a brightly lit presentation slide. Stopping abruptly, his confident expression froze into a mask of shock as Elaine walked in, completely composed, with me matching her pace exactly 2 steps behind her right shoulder. "Miss Brooks," Vanguard said, recovering his composure quickly, his voice laced with dangerous corporate politeness. "We were just discussing your unexcused, highly irregular absence from the mandatory safety audit. Given the automatic freeze on your administrative accounts, my accounts were frozen based on a fraudulent safety flag generated by your office," Elaine interrupted, walking past him and taking her rightful seat at the direct center of the table. She didn't raise her voice, but the absolute, cold authority in it demanded total silence from the room. "I was conducting an on-site, physical inspection of the Highland Cash asset, an inspection formally authorized and routed by your office, Marcus." Vanguard offered a patronizing, tight smile to the surrounding board members. "Elaine, you missed the designated transit window and took an unauthorized, decommissioned logging road. That is a massive liability to the firm. I had no choice but to initiate the default clause to protect the company's immediate interests." Elaine didn't argue the point. She simply gestured to me with one hand. Stepping forward, I closed the distance to the table. I placed the thick, bound compliance packet on the mahogany surface, sliding the duplicate copies smoothly down the polished wood so they stopped directly in front of the keyboard members. "My name is Felix Myers, lead geologist and site surveyor, Highland Cache," I stated, my voice carrying clearly across the large room. "The document currently in front of you contains the time-stamped geological survey data for the Eastern Ridge sector. I direct your attention to page 4. It contains the exact route authorization sent from Mr. Vanguard's secure terminal IP address directly to Miss Brooks's itinerary." Vanguard shifted his weight, his smile faltering at the edges. "That route was merely a preliminary suggestion. That specific route, I cut in, relying entirely on pure, verifiable facts, was flagged as structurally impassable on the site-wide safety network 3 days prior to her departure. The barometric pressure data and severe wind shear warnings were actively acknowledged by your specific login credentials at 1400 hours on Wednesday. You deliberately directed a sitting board member into a severe weather event on a structurally compromised, avalanche-prone road. That is not a suggestion, Vanguard. That is targeted, documented negligence." The room went completely, uncomfortably quiet. The only sound was the sharp rustle of heavy paper as the board members simultaneously flipped to page 4, their eyes scanning the highlighted digital timestamps and my attached signature of verification. Elaine opened her laptop and connected it to the main projector system via a wireless bridge. A highly detailed digital invoice and routing number flashed onto the massive screen behind Vanguard. "Furthermore," Elaine said, her voice turning to absolute steel, "while utilizing the emergency hardline at the secondary bunker to bypass your network block, I audited the Highland Cache procurement logs. Marcus hasn't just been manipulating my travel schedules. He's been systematically diverting asset recovery funds into a ghost account to artificially inflate the apparent value of this merger, attempting to hide a massive operational deficit." Vanguard's face lost all color. He looked at the damning numbers on the screen, then at the silent board members, then finally at me. The leverage he thought he held was entirely gone. The trap had closed on him, built entirely with the metadata he thought he had successfully hidden. "This is a misunderstanding, an internal IT matter. The logs must be corrupted by the storm," Vanguard stammered, stepping away from the head of the table, his eyes darting toward the heavy exit doors. "No," Elaine corrected, closing her laptop with a sharp, echoing snap that finalized the sequence. "This is a termination with cause, and a legal surrender of your proxy voting rights, effective immediately upon the board's review of this packet." The corporate fallout was systematic, ruthless, and efficient. By noon, Vanguard was formally escorted from the building by corporate security. The board voted unanimously to immediately restore Elaine's access, launch a full audit into Vanguard's accounts using my provided data as the baseline, and permanently cancel the manipulated merger agreement. Friday evening, the city lights below Elaine's corner office window looked like a grid of precise, illuminated data points. A sharp, ordered contrast to the chaotic whiteout of the mountain we had faced exactly 1 week prior. Sitting in the heavy leather chair opposite her expansive desk, I watched her review a final, thick, printed contract. Picking up a heavy silver pen, she signed the bottom line with a fluid motion and pushed the document precisely across the desk to me. Your new contract as lead risk advisor for all remote corporate assets, Elaine said, her voice retaining its professional edge but carrying a subtle warmth. Your retainer is paid in full, and full system access is granted. You answer directly to my office now. No more ghost routes. No more manipulated data. I picked up the contract, verifying her signature and the effective dates before sliding it into my leather portfolio. The terms are highly acceptable. Standing up from her desk, she walked over to the small coffee table near the window. She picked up a heavy ceramic mug and set it down, deliberately aligning the edge of the coaster so it sat perfectly parallel with the straight edge of the table. It was a precise, calculated movement, a perfect callback to the cabin. Dinner in town first, she said, looking back at me, explicitly claiming the moment. Then we head back to the mountain. My assistant has already cleared my calendar for the weekend and booked the transport. I told the board I require my lead risk advisor for an extended, on-site structural review. She had made the choice completely public. She wasn't just hiding me behind a formal contract. She was actively integrating me into her visible world. The forecast is completely clear for the next 48 hours, I told her, clicking the locks on my briefcase shut and standing up to meet her at the window. I'll have the map waiting. The end. Closing thoughts. Core lesson. Trust means far more when it survives extreme pressure, physical distance, and demands verifiable proof. Green flag. She chose me in public, and I kept showing up in private to do the work. Please like and subscribe so we can share more stories like this.